Well, good evening. Welcome to our Friday night Bible study, and I'm remembering now to do something I frequently don't, which is to give the date. This is for Friday, September 12th, 2025. My sister had a birthday this week. I won't say how old she is. That would give away how old I am because I'm older than all my other siblings. But she's still working in Pennsylvania. She has her RN, so she's working as I think a kind of a office supervisory position, management position, at a home health agency in the area where she lives in Pennsylvania. So her husband is still working as a dispatcher, at least as far as I understand, at a trucking company there in their hometown, where his father worked and where he's essentially worked the the bulk of his working career. So, and they have a nice little house in town. I haven't seen their house in person, but I did look it up on Zillow, and it is, if you look it up on Google Earth in Street View, it looks like a kind of a small, simple house. But you look at the listing on Zillow, and it's a nice place. So they're doing well for themselves, and so I wish her well. And of course, there has been news this week. Perhaps the biggest news was the shooting at a university in Orem, Utah. Now, that kind of is close to home for me because I spent part of my youth, high school age, in that area. Provo is just south of Orem. I took driver's ed in Provo. I went to school in Utah while my folks lived in Provo and later at Monument Valley. And so, Orem, Brigham Young University, which is actually in Provo, that area is quite familiar to me. We used to drive from Provo to Salt Lake quite a bit on Interstate 15 by well, there's a big steel plant in those days, and I saw the name of it the other day. The steel plant's not there anymore, but there are some plants that have the name, and I just it just slipped me just now. But anyway, the person who was killed was a conservative political activist who likes to go to universities, and they do have a suspect in custody now. You may have seen a lot of comments on social media about who he is, who he isn't, and all this stuff. So we won't get into that. It's just, another sign of the broken world we live in. And we're trying all these things to fix our problems, and it doesn't seem like they're helping us. It just seems like things are getting worse. And of course, if you've been in our group for any length of time, we say, well, part of the reason for that is that broken people can't fix themselves. And we are all broken people. We need divine assistance. Now, you'll hear that a lot out there in the traditional religious community. We need Jesus. Come to our church and we'll fix everything. And then they trot out what are essentially political solutions, and they don't really have a clue how to help either. So it can't be a group thing, it has to be an individual thing. And that's why we believe that God has a plan at some point to bring things to a head on this earth and take his select healed people with him for a period of time while he fixes the destroyed planet and everything else, and gives us time to heal before we come back, so that he can reestablish the human species on this planet as he originally intended. So, I don't know that there was anything else in particular that I wanted to bring up. I was thinking of things. Oh, well, actually, you won't see it here, but when you switch to this computer is currently being used for quite a few things. The desktop computer that I use every day went belly up again this week. Now, that happened a few months ago, and it was the mass storage device, the solid state drive, we call it. They're not really drives anymore because there aren't any moving parts. But you know, they're like that, and they're mass storage. And that device, it just completely quit working. So there was nothing for it to load. So I had to replace that. Well, this time I came in to the office and I had a BIOS setup screen up. What's it doing there? And then to this day, I'm not sure. I probably never will be sure what happened. But at any rate, I exited the BIOS setup and it booted to Windows. And I opened a few of my usual applications on Windows and did some things. And one of the things I did was I have a program called DOSBox that allows me to play DOS games from way back in the 90s. I have a couple of games that I programmed myself, plus some other games that I've downloaded that I like. And so I was playing one of those. I got to the end and it hung up. And I did eventually get the mouse cursor back, and I was listening to a YouTube video, and the video kept running, but I couldn't get the window up to look at it. I couldn't do anything. The computer wouldn't do anything. So when I'd heard what I thought was enough of the video to know what was going on, I reached down and held the power button until the computer restarted. And it came up to the BIOS screen, but it didn't go past it. So I punched the buttons it said to punch to get into setup or to the boot options, and nothing happened. I restarted it, did the same thing. Right away I was punching those buttons right off and nothing happened. So it's not getting past that. And I did what I read somewhere about resetting the BIOS. So if there's corrupted BIOS settings, that you can reset those and reboot the computer. I tried that, and that didn't seem to make any difference in its behavior. Well, now what am I going to do? If you buy a different motherboard, Windows is going to throw a hissy fit, because when it installs, it looks at the computer that it's starting on, and it loads drivers for everything specific to the thing that you've installed it on. So if you put in a different motherboard, it may not work at all, and at the very least you're going to have a whole bunch of problems before you can actually get in and start using it. But I thought, I wonder if I can find the exact same make and model of motherboard that I was using and just replace it and put all the other stuff, you know, the CPU and the memory and all those other peripherals on that board, and install it in the case and see if that will boot up, and if the hard drive and the operating system will recognize all of that as being essentially the same thing and not raise a fuss, and I get my computer back. So I have now ordered that. I've also ordered a better video card, because I recently downloaded some games and I tried to play them, and they were very hard to play because the cheap little video card that I have in that machine, when it's rendering full 3D, it'll do it. It has the software in it to do it, but it's limited and it's slow, and it costs up about 1 or 2 frames per second. And if you're familiar with gaming, you know, a lot can happen between frames and you can't see what's happening because it's not updating, so then you overshoot with your controller. It's a real mess. So it's expensive, but we're going to try that. And so that was another mess to deal with this week. Well, okay, so we've nattered on about nonsense long enough. We are going to get into the book of Nehemiah. We finished the last chapter of 2nd Chronicles and the entire book of Ezra last week. I don't know if we'll finish all of Nehemiah this week, but it's possible. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll bow our heads and we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you that you have a plan for dealing with our species' broken, messed up state and condition, and that you have a plan to fix everything and to restore what you originally created. We'd like to be part of that. We would like to be witnesses of the wonderful things you have in store for humanity. as we open the written word, we want to get a clear glimpse of your character, your loveliness, and how long-suffering and patient you are with messed up humans. Send your Holy Spirit that we might get a better understanding through the prompting of your Spirit in each person's understanding. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we have up the beginning of Nehemiah here out of the New Living Translation. I say this every once in a while. We don't use it because we think it's better than any other particular translation. In fact, we do notice from time to time some rather severe limitations, one of which is that it tends to be highly interpretive. And being interpretive makes it easier to read because they do some of the mental hard work for you, the intellectual heavy lifting, shall we say. But what if they're wrong about something and then they make an interpretation rather than rendering the original language? So, you kind of have to pick. Everything we have in terms of a written word has the mark of human intervention on it. And even if, which we don't, we had what are called the original autographs, so we could actually look at the handwriting of the prophets as well as the exact letters and words they used and so forth. I don't think that would help that much, because guess what? And the prophets and apostles and so forth, they were human too. So they were prone to error, just like the translators and all these other people. We do believe that God has had his hand in things, and he's given us something that will be helpful to us, particularly if we call on the Holy Spirit. It's interesting. A lot of traditional religion will teach you that the Bible is infallible. There's no errors in it. But you still have to have the Holy Spirit to help you interpret it. Well, okay, I can understand where that comes from. But, if it's right, well, anyway. So, Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1. These are the memoirs of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In late autumn, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was at the fortress of Susa. Now, there's a footnote there regarding the date, most likely. A number of dates in the book of Nehemiah can be cross-checked with dates in surviving Persian records and related accurately to our modern calendar. This month of the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar occurred within the months of November and December 446 BC or BCE, depending on which way you prefer to use it. The 20th year probably refers to the reign of King Artaxerxes I. Compare chapter 2, verse 1 and chapter 5, verse 14. Now, Susa was at the time the fortress and capital of the Persian Empire. And so that's where a lot of these stories took place. Daniel mentions Susa, but the Susa that he mentions, he didn't actually visit. He saw the place in a vision, and in that vision then he saw the ram and the he-goat and the horns and all these things. That's in chapter 8 of his book. So he mentions Susa, but there's no indication that he ever actually went there. The story of Daniel and Darius, which would have been the Darius who captured Babylon and was not the king of all Persia, just king of Babylon once he defeated the successors to Nebuchadnezzar. That happened in Babylon, not over in Susa. However, the next book that we will get to, the book of Esther, does take place at Susa, and possibly under this same King Artaxerxes, although we'll look into that when we get to that book. Hanani, one of my brothers, and that's a shortening of the name of one of Daniel's friends, but clearly not, because this is about a generation after the return to Judah and Jerusalem. Hananiah, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. Now, Susa, we know where that was. We know where Babylon was. You can see ruins of both cities uh, in reality and in Google Earth Street View as well. So these places are things you can look at and you can see what they get an idea of what they looked like at the time. I mean, obviously, they're a number of years have passed. They're a little run down. I just look at the garage out the backyard of my house and look at how it's looking and run down, and that's just in the 20 years we've owned the house. After a few thousand years, things are going to be a little rugged looking. Anyway, Susa is, well, it's if you drew a line from Jerusalem to Babylon and extended it another 100 miles or so, you would get to Susa. So getting from Judah to Susa, as these men had just done, was quite a trip. At any rate, as I asked them about the Jews who had returned there from captivity and about how things were going in Jerusalem, and they said to me, "Things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." Well, that was the doing of Nebuchadnezzar. And while they had come back, they hadn't really done a lot of work towards rebuilding the city itself. When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven. Then I said, "O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of unfailing love with those who love him and obey his commands, listen to my prayer. Look down and see me praying night and day for your people Israel. I confess that we have sinned against you. Yes, even my own family and I have sinned. We have sinned terribly by not obeying the commands, decrees, and regulations you gave us through your servant Moses. Please remember what you told your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful to me, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands and live by them, then even if you are exiled to the ends of the earth, I will bring you back to the place I have chosen for my name to be honored." And at footnote B, I glanced at that earlier. It says something about, of the heavens. To the ends of the heavens, not just the ends of the earth. And that's my wife. I think maybe she wants to say something. Hello, do you want to say something? Oh, I got it. I got to put it on speaker mode. It won't hear it at all. It went on to Bluetooth.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Did you want to say something?
Yes. I need to turn off sound here. What you just read sounded awfully works-oriented. Where is he focused on the love of God instead of his own behavior?
Well, you're right. There's a very distinct old covenant tint to what he's saying. This is what they had been raised with.
That's what we were raised with.
Well, yeah, that too. Which is why you can't live on the Old Testament alone. You have to read the New Testament. You have to discover the New Covenant. The New Covenant that can do what the Old Covenant could not do. Yeah,
when you look at it literally, you end up with some cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Because that you're told they're two different things, but they're the same thing. But you don't see them as the same thing.
Yeah.
Because you've been taught that it's all about behavior.
Well, yeah, that's true. And, that's because as humans, we tend to be control-oriented. We want to reach out and control others. And so when we come to religion, we see that as a powerful tool for controlling others' behavior. And so we depict the God that sees everything If you slip up in the slightest, he's going to get you. He's going to put you in hell, and you're going to burn in torment forever and forever. Frighten you into knuckling under to their control. And there is an element of that in what Nehemiah is reading. He's seeing it now. He does admit accurately that he and his family have sinned as well as everybody else. But he's also then saying, well, let's get together and follow these rules, because if we do, then God will bless us. So,
Well, that's the all right. Same with tithing. It's the same with tithing.
is it?
It certainly is. Pay God what He's due, and He will bless you. And if you don't pay Him, then He's going to send disasters.
Yeah.
And, you've turned him into a criminal running a protection racket. You need to put him in jail. You need to put God in jail. But the Bible doesn't support that. Here's
Right.
what we're taught. It's all about behavior.
And
And that is the great deception.
mm-hmm.
At least I think it is.
Well, if you make it about behavior, that's attainable, that's achievable.
No, it's not.
Well, no, it's not, but it is perceived as attainable and achievable. And there are people out there who have a level of self-control, and grit and determination to, obey what they see as the entire list of rules. And so they get kind of cocky because they think, well, I've done all this. I'm obeying the rules. I'm good. But that very cockiness and arrogance is part of their broken condition, and it makes them toxic to other people.
They're self-absorbed.
Yeah, that too. The people you rescued by your great power and strong hand are your servants. O Lord, please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those of us who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it into his heart to be kind to me. In those days, I was the king's cupbearer. Now, footnote C says, today in the sight of this man. But we know he's talking about the king because of what will follow. Now, we talked about this when we got to the story of Joseph and the importance of the cupbearer. Because in those days, one of the paths to kingship was kill the existing king and then take his place. So kings had to be exceptionally careful that they did everything in their power to eliminate threats to their lives. And so somebody as important as a cupbearer who would bring drinks to the king and who had the opportunity to poison the king by putting something in that drink, you had to make sure that the person in that position was a trusted person, someone you could rely on, and that was Nehemiah. In Pharaoh's day, that was the man who ended up in prison because the king got nervous. But Joseph became a man of trust, not as a cupbearer, but as an advisor and as someone who could prepare the nation for upcoming disaster. So that's chapter 1. We go on to chapter 2. Early the following spring, in the month of Nisan, and month of Nisan I think was the first, this month of the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar occurred within the months of April and May, 445 BC. Nisan may not be the first. I'd have to look that up. Anyway. Anyway, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. He was the cupbearer. I had never before appeared sad in his presence, so the king asked me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified, but I replied, "Long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." The king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." The king, with his queen sitting beside him, asked, "How long will you be gone? When will you return?" After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. Now, I think you'll find that as we read through this, we'll see that Nehemiah made at least 2 trips to Judah and Jerusalem. So he made the initial trip to get things started, and then he went later to check on things, whatever. We'll see as we read through. I also said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah." Now, that footnote indicates that they're being interpretive when they indicate Euphrates River, that the Hebrew just says the province beyond the river. But generally we understand that when the Old Testament speaks of the river, it means the Euphrates. Instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself. And the king granted these requests, because the gracious hand of God was on me. When I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, I delivered the king's letters to them. The king, I should add, had sent along army officers and horsemen to protect me. Charioteers is another potential rendering of what was said there. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of my arrival, they were very displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. Now, we can understand why the Ammonites might dislike the resurgence of Judah. Judah had at one time been their enemy. Recall that King Nahash of the Ammonites had attacked Judah during the reign of Saul, at the beginning of the reign of Saul. And Saul had gotten an army together and went over there and, handed him his backside on a platter, essentially. And so he was not friends with Saul. But then, as Saul descended into insanity and David came around, David was Saul's enemy. And so David ended up having good relations with Nahash the Ammonite because of, the principle, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, sometime after David took the throne, Nahash passed away, and his son took the throne. And David sent some officials to the capital of Ammon to express his condolences over the loss of his friend Nahash. But the king's advisors convinced him that David was a threat. And in convincing their king that David was a threat, David became a threat. And David essentially wiped out the Ammonites and made them subjects of his kingdom. So, yeah, there was a lot of reason for someone like Tobiah, an Ammonite official, to resent Israel for historic reasons. Not necessarily for anything the Jews of that time had done. And then there's also this Sanballat the Horonite. And let's just look that up real quick here. Let's see what this Bible dictionary, this is an older book, but it's, yes, Sanballat, the moon god hath given life, that's the meaning of his name. He is called the Horonite, which probably means a native of Beth Horon, though some explain it as of Horonaim. He held apparently some command in Samaria at the time of Nehemiah, at the time that Nehemiah was preparing to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And from the moment of Nehemiah's arrival in Judea, he set himself to oppose every measure for the welfare of Jerusalem. His daughter married Manasseh, grandson of the high priest Eliashib. He was, for that reason, expelled from Jerusalem and became high priest of the Samaritans. Interesting. Well, we might run across that in the book of Nehemiah here. I don't think that was mentioned in Ezra. So I arrived in Jerusalem. 3 days later, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. I had not told anyone about the plans God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. We took no pack animals with us except the donkey I was riding. In other words, everybody else had to walk. I'm the big shot. I get to ride the donkey. After dark, I went out through the valley gate, past the jackal's well, and over to the dung gate to inspect the broken walls and burned gates. Footnote D, serpent's well. Jackal's well, serpent's well, okay. Then I went to the fountain gate and over to the king's pool, but my donkey couldn't get through the rubble. So, though it was still dark, I went up the Kidron Valley instead, inspecting the wall before I turned back and entered again at the valley gate. The city officials did not know I had been out there or what I was doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. But now I said to them, "You know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace." Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and about my conversation with the king. Now, this focus on the walls is indicative of the nature of the region in which they lived and the culture of the time. We are not used to having walls around our cities here in this country. And we do tend to put fences around our yards, but not around our whole houses. You go to different countries, and the houses either have gates at the front or they're behind cinder block walls or brick walls or some sort of wall. And that's true particularly in the area around Jerusalem. All the houses, I mean, even the low-income places where the houses are built with basic stuff, one of the requirements, it seems to be, is that they have walls up around their houses. Well, this indicates the fear in which people live. And so Nehemiah is here to talk about rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem and ending its disgrace, but in reality, it's an issue of security. If there's a wall around your city, you're less susceptible to attacks by foreigners. And he struck a note with the people in Jerusalem. They replied at once, "Yes, let's rebuild the wall." So they began the good work. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab heard of our plan, they scoffed contemptuously. "What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" they asked. And some of what we read out of the book of Ezra may have been related to this when they wrote to the king and said, "You know, this city is full of rebellion, and look at its history. You let it be rebuilt, and they're going to rebel against you, and you won't get as much tribute and taxes as you were getting. I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall, but you have no share, legal right, or historic claim in Jerusalem. Well, Arabs and Tobiah the Ammonite, I don't know who for sure who Sanballat is, but we're seeing the seeds of the contempt of Samaritans that Jesus encountered when he came to this earth. Next chapter. Then Eliashib the high priest and the other priests started to rebuild at the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set up its doors, building the wall as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and the Tower of Hananel. People from the town of Jericho worked next to them, and beyond them was Zachar, son of Imri. The fish gate was built by the sons of Hassenaah. They laid the beams, set up its doors, and installed its bolts and bars. Meremoth, son of Uriah and grandson of Hakkoz, repaired the next section of the wall. Beside him were Meshullam, son of Berechiah and grandson of Meshezabel, and then Zadok, son of Baana. Next were the people from Tekoa, though their leaders refused to work with the construction supervisors. The old city gate was repaired by Joiada, son of Paseah, and Meshullam, son of Besodiah. They laid the beams, set up its doors, and installed its bolts and bars. Next to them were Melatiah from Gibeon, Jadon from Meronoth, people from Gibeon, and people from Mizpah, the headquarters of the governor of the province west of the Euphrates River. Again, footnote B will probably say just the river. Okay. Okay, we got to that. Okay, we're ready for verse 8. I just had to look for a second, figure out where I'd skip down to footnotes. Next was Uzziel, son of Harhiah, a goldsmith by trade, who also worked on the wall. Beyond him was Hananiah, a manufacturer of perfumes. They left out a section of Jerusalem as they built the broad wall. Raphiah, son of Hur, the leader of half the district of Jerusalem, was next to them on the wall. Next, Jediah, son of Harumoth, repaired the wall across from his own house. And next to him was Haddish, son of Hashabaniah. Then came Malchijah, son of Haram, and Hashab, son of Pahath Moab, who repaired another section of the wall and the Tower of the Ovens. Shallum, son of Halahesh, and his daughters, interesting, repaired the next section. He was the leader of the other half of the district of Jerusalem. The valley gate was repaired by the people from Zanoah, led by Hanan. They set up its doors and installed its bolts and bars. They also repaired the 1,500 feet of wall to the dung gate. Footnote D, they'll just translate that, 1,000 cubits. All right. The dung gate was repaired by Malchijah, son of Rechab, the leader of the Beth Hakaram district. He rebuilt it, set up its doors, and installed its bolts and bars. Now, just for the fun of it, I'm going to look something up real quick, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I may not tell you what it is when I find out what it says. Okay. That term dung gate essentially means what we think it would mean, so. And because the animal refuse was potentially either fertilizer or fuel, they would carefully pick it up from the city streets and take it outside, and so the gate where they did that would be known as, would be given that name. The fountain gate was repaired by Shallum, son of Kal-Hozeh, the leader of the Mizpah district. He rebuilt it, roofed it, set up its doors, and installed its bolts and bars. Then he repaired the wall of the pool of Siloam near the king's garden. And he rebuilt the wall as far as the stairs that descend from the city of David. Next to him was Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, the leader of half the district of Beth-zur. He rebuilt the wall from a place across from the tombs of David's family as far as the water reservoir and the house of the warriors. Next to him, repairs were made by a group of Levites working under the supervision of Rehum, son of Bani. Then came Hashabiah, the leader of half the district of Keilah, who supervised the building of the wall on behalf of his own district. Next down the line were his countrymen, led by Benui, son of Henadad, the leader of the other half of the district of Keilah. Benui had a footnote there. As in a few Hebrew manuscripts, some Greek manuscripts, and the Syriac version, most Hebrew manuscripts read Bavai. Well, no. They're just names. By our time, we don't really have any way to say we know who these people were. Just how are you going to translate it, I guess, or transliterate it, read it. Next to them, Ezer, son of Yeshua, the leader of Mizpah, repaired another section of wall across from the ascent to the armory near the angle in the wall. Next to him was Baruch, son of Zabai, who zealously repaired an additional section from the angle to the door of the house of Eliashib the high priest. Meremoth, son of Uriah and grandson of Hakkoz, rebuilt another section of the wall extending from the door of Eliashib's house to the end of the house. The next repairs were made by the priests from the surrounding region. After them, Benjamin and Hashub repaired the section across from their house, and Azariah, son of Maaseiah and grandson of Ananiah, repaired the section across from his house. Next was Benui, son of Henadad, who rebuilt another section of the wall from Azariah's house to the angle and the corner. Palal, son of Uzai, carried on the work from a point opposite the angle and the tower that projects up from the king's upper house beside the court of the guard. Next to him were Pedaiah, son of Parosh, with the temple servants living on the hill of Ophel, who repaired the wall as far as the point across from the water gate to the east and the projecting tower. Then came the people of Tekoa, who repaired another section across from the great projecting tower and over to the wall of Ophel. Now this Tekoa might sound familiar to you because in the days of David, Joab sent to a wise woman from Tekoa to go and play an act before the king, trying to get the king to invite Absalom back. Above the horse gate, the priests repaired the wall. Each one repaired the section immediately across from his own house. Then Zadok, son of Immer, also rebuilt the wall across from his own house, and beyond him was Shemaiah, son of Shechaniah, the gatekeeper of the east gate. Next, Hananiah, son of Shelemiah, and Hanan, the sixth son of Zalaph, repaired another section, while Meshullam, son of Berechiah, rebuilt the wall across from where he lived. Malchijah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the wall as far as the housing for the temple servants and merchants, across from the inspection gate. Then he continued as far as the upper room at the corner. The other goldsmiths and merchants repaired the wall from that corner to the sheep gate. This really doesn't mean a whole lot unless we had a map of Jerusalem and somebody could point out where these places were, and I'm not sure if anybody's ever undertaken that. Let me just do something here. Well, okay, map of the gates. So people have undertaken that. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time. You can see there that some of them are a little bit different in how they draw. Most of them show a rather narrow section and not the larger area, but this one here. Anyway, interesting. So let's go on to the next chapter and see if we get back into the story. Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a single day just by offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap, and charred ones at that?" Now, Sanballat's clearly trash talking here and acting like a typical toxic human. And if you don't have logic to defeat your enemy, resort to name calling and belittling. So, yeah, I think that's what's going on here. Sanballat doesn't really have a carefully prepared argument why the Jews shouldn't do this, so he's just resorting to trash talk and belittling. Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, remarked, "That stone wall would collapse if even a fox walked along the top of it." Then I prayed, "Hear us, our God, for we are being mocked. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders." Well, you can understand Nehemiah's distress and anger here, his frustration. He's trying to encourage the people to rebuild the wall, and these guys are out there trying to tear down the morale of the people he's trying to help. So, yeah, he would be upset, and he might use some pretty strong language, and he might call on his misunderstanding of God to ask God to do things that God probably is not inclined to do. At last the wall was completed half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs, Ammonites and Ashdodites heard that the work was going ahead and that the gaps in the wall of Jerusalem were being repaired, they were furious. You don't want a strong neighbor when you're in a mode where you might feel like you need to resort to violence to control these people. So when they put up defenses, that's going to make you mad. They all made plans to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw us into confusion. But we prayed to our God and guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. Then the people of Judah began to complain, "The workers are getting tired and there's so much rubble to be moved. We'll never be able to build the wall by ourselves." So these opponents of rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem are having an effect on the morale of the people. They're beginning to look at the job and they're beginning to be overwhelmed. Look at all this rubble. Look at this mess. How are we going to do all this work? Now, this sense of being overwhelmed is particularly difficult for people with depression. And I can testify to that myself because I've been diagnosed with depression, and I can testify about times in my life when I faced tasks and just got totally overwhelmed by them. And that started when I was in 8th grade, and possibly before that, when I would look ahead at life and say, it's terrible now and it's only going to get worse. And that is a symptom of depression. Didn't know it at the time. Nobody could tell me that. I just knew I had this sense of being overwhelmed. And well, life goes on. You have to meet it. Once I finished college and got a career and began working as an adult, I would confront situations that were overwhelming to me, but I'd go to work and start working on them, and the next thing you know, they were done and finished. And I began to recognize that was just a symptom. It wasn't reality. And if I felt overwhelmed, well, just tackle the job and you'll get through it. So Not everybody who suffers from depression is able to deal with it like I did, but I was able to do that. So, meanwhile, our enemies were saying, before they know what's happening, we will swoop down on them and kill them and end their work. The Jews who lived near the enemy came and told us again and again, they will come from all directions and attack us. So I placed armed guards behind the lowest parts of the wall in the exposed areas. I stationed the people to stand guard by families, armed with swords, spears, and bows. Then, as I looked over the situation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord, who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. When our enemies heard that we knew of their plans and that God had frustrated them, we all returned to our work on the wall. But from then on, only half my men worked, while the other half stood guard with spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. The leaders stationed themselves behind the people of Judah who were building the wall. The laborers carried on their work with one hand supporting their load and one hand holding a weapon. Well, that's pretty ineffective. If you've ever done any building and you imagine trying to do it with one hand while another hand holds a weapon, that's going to be awkward. All the builders had a sword belted to their side. Well, that's not such a thing. You don't have to have a hand tied up for that. The trumpeter stayed with me to sound the alarm. Then I explained to the nobles and officials and all the people. The work is very spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. When you hear the blast of the trumpet, rush to wherever it is sounding. Then our God will fight for us. We worked early and late, from sunrise to sunset, and half the men were always on guard. I also told everyone living outside the walls to stay in Jerusalem. That way they and their servants could help with guard duty at night and work during the day. During this time, none of us, not I, nor my relatives, nor my servants, nor the guards who were with me, ever took off our clothes. We carried our weapons with us at all times, even when we went for water. Now we get past the wall and the opposition to rebuilding the wall to some other things that Nehemiah got into. About this time, some of the men and their wives raised a cry of protest against their fellow Jews. They were saying, we have such large families, we need more food to survive. Others said, we have mortgaged our fields, vineyards, and homes to get food during the famine. And others said, we have had to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay our taxes. We belong to the same family as those who are wealthy, and our children are just like theirs, yet we must sell our children into slavery just to get enough money to live. We've already sold some of our daughters. Imagine what that involves. And we are helpless to do anything about it, for our fields and vineyards are already mortgaged to others. When I heard their complaints, I was very angry. After thinking it over, I spoke out against these nobles and officials. You are hurting your own relatives by charging interest when they borrow money. Then I called a public meeting to deal with the problem. Now this chapter right here is going to be one of the key parts of the belief in the Dark Ages that the Bible condemned interest. Yeah, well, let's just read on and see what it says here. At the meeting I said to them, we are doing all we can to redeem our Jewish relatives who have had to sell themselves to pagan foreigners. But you are selling them back into slavery again. How often must we redeem them? And they had nothing to say in their defense. Then I pressed further, what you are doing is not right. Should you not walk in the fear of our God in order to avoid being mocked by enemy nations? I myself, as well as my brothers and my workers, have been lending the people money and grain, but now let us stop this business of charging interest. You must restore their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and homes to them this very day, and repay the interest you charged when you lent them money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. They replied, we will give back everything and demand nothing more from the people. We will do as you say. Then I called the priests and made the nobles and officials swear to do what they had promised. I shook off the folds of my robe and said, if you fail to keep your promise, may God shake you like this from your homes and from your property. The whole assembly responded, Amen, and they praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. For the entire 12 years that I was governor of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of the reign of King Artaxerxes, so we're looking at about 12 years there, neither I nor my officials drew on our official food allowance. The former governors, in contrast, had laid heavy burdens on the people, demanding a daily ration of food and wine, besides 40 pieces of silver. Even their assistants took advantage of the people. But because I feared God, I did not act that way. I also devoted myself to working on the wall and refused to acquire any land, and I required all my servants to spend time working on the wall. I asked for nothing, even though I regularly fed 150 Jewish officials at my table, besides all the visitors from other lands. The provisions I paid for each day included 1 ox, 6 choice sheep or goats, and a large number of poultry. And every 10 days we needed a large supply of all kinds of wine. Yet I refused to claim the governor's food allowance because the people already carried a heavy burden. Remember, oh my God, all that I have done for these people, and bless me for it. Now, I want to look in the NIV because that didn't say something that I was expecting. And I'm thinking that I'm remembering what it says in the NIV. And yes. Yes, I'm going to read verses 9 through 11. So I continued, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain. But let the exacting of usury stop. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the usury you are charging them, the 100th part of the money, grain, new wine, and oil. Now, let me look that up in the King James, because I think that is there as well. So I believe that that indication of the 100th part is found in the original Hebrew, and this version left it out. And then we'll talk about why they might have done that. Yeah, I'm going to read just verse 11 from the King James. Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses. Also the 100th part of the money, and of the corn, the wine, and the oil that ye exact of them. Now, I want to talk about that because even the NIV, when it gets to the parts talking about usury and the ban on usury, they want to sometimes insert the term excessive usury. Well, okay, excessive usury. So usury is allowed, but just not excessive usury. Well, what's the definition of excessive usury? Well, maybe we find that right here in Nehemiah. 100th part. What percentage is that? 1%. Have you found a credit card that'll charge you 1% per annum? I haven't. Have you found a bank that will loan you money or mortgage your house at 1%? I don't think so. If Nehemiah considered 1% excessive usury, what is being charged to people today? Let me get off my soapbox. Enough of that. I just find that interesting there, that what he considered to be oppression of his people. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet set up the doors and the gates. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But I realized they were plotting to harm me, so I replied by sending this message to them. I am engaged in a great work, so I can't come. Why should I stop working to come and meet with you? 4 times they sent the same message, and each time I gave the same reply. The fifth time, Sanballat's servant came with an open letter in his hand, and this is what it said. There is a rumor among the surrounding nations, and Geshem tells me it is true, that you and the Jews are planning to rebel, and that is why you are building the wall. Well, yeah, possibly a logical conclusion to draw, and it's certainly the report that they sent to Artaxerxes. According to his reports, you plan to be their king. He also reports that you have appointed prophets in Jerusalem to proclaim about you, look, there is a king in Judah. Well, that's probably a lie. We don't know for sure because this is the self-reported by Nehemiah, but you can be very sure that this report will get back to the king. So I suggest you come and talk it over with me. Well, this is one of the typical ploys of toxic people. They want you to come negotiate with them. So they make up some ridiculous accusation and say, I'll go tell on you if you don't come talk to me and we work this out. Well, maybe they don't need to work it out. Maybe you just need to sit down and shut up. Anyway. I replied, there is no truth in any part of your story. You are making up the whole thing. They were just trying to intimidate us, imagining that they could discourage us and stop the work. So I continued the work with even greater determination. And checking the time here. Later I went to visit Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, and grandson of Mehetabel, who was confined to his home. He said, let us meet together inside the temple of God and bolt the doors shut. Your enemies are coming to kill you tonight. But I replied, should someone in my position run from danger? Should someone in my position enter the temple to save his life? No, I won't do it. I realized that God had not spoken to him, but that he had uttered this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. They were hoping to intimidate me and make me sin. Then they would be able to accuse and discredit me. Remember, oh my God, all the evil things that Tobiah and Sanballat have done, and remember Noadiah the prophet and all the prophets like her who have tried to intimidate me. I'm curious. Verse 14, chapter 6. The NIV does not indicate the gender of Noadiah, so I don't know where these guys, I guess, just based on the Hebrew form of the name, they assumed that this Noadiah was female. And apparently there's no other reference to this person. This is just kind of out of the blue here. Noadiah, she wasn't mentioned earlier, or he, whoever it was. So on October 2nd, the wall was finished. On the 25th day of the month of Elul of the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar. This day was October 2, 445 BC. See also a note on 1:1 about being able to link dates here to dates from the Persian calendar. So on October 2, the wall was finished, just 52 days after we had begun. When our enemies and the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated. They realized this work had been done with the help of our God. During those 52 days, many letters went back and forth between Tobiah and the nobles of Judah. For many in Judah had sworn allegiance to him because his father-in-law was Shechaniah, son of Erah, and his son Jehohanan was married to the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. They kept telling me about Tobiah's good deeds, and then they told him everything I said, and Tobiah kept sending threatening letters to intimidate me. After the wall was finished, and I had set up the doors in the gates, the gatekeepers, singers, and Levites were appointed. I gave the responsibility of governing Jerusalem to my brother Hananiah, along with Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, for he was a faithful man who feared God more than most. I said to them, do not leave the gates open during the hottest part of the day. And even while the gatekeepers are on duty, have them shut and bar the doors. Appoint the residents of Jerusalem to act as guards, everyone on a regular watch. Some will serve as sentry posts, and some in front of their own homes. At that time, the city was large and spacious, but the population was small, and none of the houses had been rebuilt. So my God gave me the idea to call together all the nobles and leaders of the city, along with the ordinary citizens, for registration. I had found the genealogical record of those who had first returned to Judah. This is what was written there. Here is the list of the Jewish exiles of the provinces who returned from their captivity. King Nebuchadnezzar had deported them to Babylon, but now they returned to Jerusalem and the other towns in Judah where they originally lived. Their leaders were Zerubbabel, Yeshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Realiah, Nahamani, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baana. And then it's going to list the number of the men of Israel who returned from exile, which I think is very similar to a list that we found in the book of Ezra, including these descendants of the servants of King Solomon. Three families of priests, so a total of 42,360 people returned to Judah. 42,000, 50,000, that's a moderately sized city. But this is for the whole of Judah. Now this is interesting. Look at the bottom here. In October, footnote X, and they've got a whole bunch of footnotes in this. In the 7th month, a month the ancient Hebrew linear calendar occurred within the months of October and November, 445 BC. So all this is happening at about the same time. When the Israelites had settled in their towns, comma, end of chapter. So they did it a little bit differently. Now that's, we're in chapter 7. All right, yeah. Yeah, the NIV puts the rest, actually ends a sentence with that word towns, and then puts another sentence in chapter 8, in chapter 7, before it begins chapter 8. So this version divides it up a little differently. All the people assembled with a unified purpose at the square just inside the water gate. They asked Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given for Israel to obey. So on October 8, Ezra the priest brought the book of the law before the assembly, which included the men and women and all the children old enough to understand. He faced the square just inside the water gate from early morning until noon and read aloud to everyone who could understand. All the people listened closely to the book of the law. And this is an incident that was reported in the book of Ezra. Ezra the scribe stood on a high wooden platform that had been made for the occasion. To his right stood Mattithiah, Shema, Ananiah, Uriah, Hilkiah, and Messiah. To his left stood Pedaiah, Mishael, Malchijah, Hashem, Hashbaddanah, Zechariah, and Meshullam. Ezra stood on the platform in full view of all the people. When they saw him open the book, they all rose to their feet. Then Ezra praised the Lord, the great God, and all the people chanted, Amen, Amen, as they lifted up their hands. Then they bowed down and worshipped the Lord with their faces to the ground. The Levites, and he gives a name of all those, then instructed the people in the law while everyone remained in their places. They read from the book of the law of God and clearly explained the meaning of what was being read, helping the people understand each passage. Then Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites were interpreting for the people, said to them, Don't mourn or weep on such a day as this, for today is a sacred day before the Lord your God. For the people had all been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. And Nehemiah continued, Go and celebrate with a feast of rich foods and sweet drinks, and share gifts of food with people who have nothing prepared. This is a sacred day before our Lord. Don't be dejected and sad, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. There's a phrase been turned into a song. The joy of the Lord is your strength. And the Levites too quieted the people, telling them, Hush, don't weep, for this is a sacred day. So the people went away to eat and drink at a festive meal, to share gifts of food, and to celebrate with great joy because they had heard God's words and understood them. On October 9th, the family leaders of all the people, together with the priests and Levites, met with Ezra the scribe to go over the law in greater detail. As they studied the law, they discovered that the Lord had commanded through Moses that the Israelites should live in shelters during the festival to be held that month. He had said that a proclamation should be made throughout their towns and in Jerusalem, telling the people to go to the hills to get branches from olive, wild olive, myrtle, palm, and other leafy trees. They were to use these branches to make shelters in which they would live during the festival as prescribed in the law. Now, this would likely be very similar to what the Navajo call a summer shelter. And at least when I was in that part of the country, the Navajos would build essentially pole frames, and then they would cover those pole frames with leafy branches. The leaves would dry out, but they would provide some level of shade. And the fact that these structures were open meant that any breeze could blow right through, and they were actually quite comfortable places out there in the desert, the summer shelters. So this is something very similar that they would be erecting for this festival of shelters. And it was to remind them of their days sojourning in the desert, the 40 years that they spent. So the people went out and cut branches and used them to build shelters on the roofs of their houses, in their courtyards, in the courtyards of God's temple, or in the squares just inside the water gate and the Ephraim gate. So everyone had returned from captivity, lived in these shelters during the festival, and they were all filled with great joy. The Israelites had not celebrated like this since the days of Joshua, son of Nun. Well, okay, that's a bit of I'm trying to think of the term for it. Superlative language that may or may not have been justified. We found that kind of superlative language as we were reading through Chronicles, where it talks about the Passover celebrated both in the days of Hezekiah and later in the days of Josiah. As were read from the book of the law on each of the 7 days of the festival, then on the 8th day they held a solemn assembly as was required by law. Next chapter. On October 31, the people assembled again, and this time they fasted and dressed in burlap and sprinkled dust on their heads. Those of Israelite descent separated themselves from all foreigners as they confessed their own sins and the sins of their ancestors. They remained standing in place for 3 hours while the book of the law of the Lord their God was read aloud to them. Then for 3 more hours they confessed their sins and worshipped the Lord their God. The Levites, Yeshua, Bani, Kadmiel, Shebaniah, Buni, Sherebiah, Bani, and Kanani, stood on the stairway of the Levites and cried out to the Lord their God with loud voices. Then the leaders of the Levites, Yeshua, Kadmiel, Bani, Hashabniah, Sherebiah, Hodiah, Shebaniah, and Pethahiah, called out to the people, "Stand up and praise the Lord your God, for he lives from everlasting to everlasting." Then they prayed, "May your glorious name be praised. May it be exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are the Lord. You made the skies and the heavens and all the stars. You made the earth and the seas and everything in them. You preserved them all, and the angels of heaven worship you. You are the Lord God who chose Abram and brought him from Ur of the Chaldeans and renamed him Abraham. When he had proved himself faithful, you made a covenant with him to give him and his descendants the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and Girgashites. And you have done what you promised, for you are always true to your word. You saw the misery of our ancestors in Egypt, and you heard their cries from beside the Red Sea. You displayed miraculous signs and wonders against Pharaoh, his officials, and all his people, for you knew how arrogantly they were treating our ancestors. You have a glorious reputation that has never been forgotten. You divided the sea for your people so they could walk through on dry land. And then you hurled their enemies into the depths of the sea. Well, they kind of did that themselves, but anyway. They sank like stones beneath the mighty waters. You led our ancestors by a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night so that they could find their way. You came down at Mount Sinai and spoke to them from heaven. You gave them regulations and instructions that were just, and decrees and commands that were good. You instructed them concerning your holy Sabbath, and you commanded them through Moses your servant to obey all your commands, decrees, and instructions. You gave them bread from heaven when they were hungry, and water from the rock when they were thirsty. You commanded them to go and take possession of the land you had sworn to give them. But our ancestors were proud and stubborn, and they paid no attention to your commands. They refused to obey and did not remember the miracles you had done for them. Instead, they became stubborn and appointed a leader to take them back to their slavery in Egypt. But you are a God of forgiveness, gracious and merciful, slow to become angry, and rich in unfailing love. You did not abandon them, even when they made an idol shaped like a calf and said, "This is your God who brought you out of Egypt." They committed terrible blasphemies. But in your great mercy, you did not abandon them to die in the wilderness. The pillar of cloud still led them forward by day, and the pillar of fire showed them the way through the night. You sent your good spirit to instruct them, and you did not stop giving them manna from heaven or water for their thirst. For 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. Then you helped our ancestors conquer kingdoms and nations, and you placed your people in every corner of the land. They took over the land of King Sihon of Heshbon and the land of King Og of Bashan. You made their descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and brought them to the land you had promised to their ancestors. This is a rehash of the history of Israel, obviously. They went and took possession of the land. You subdued whole nations before them. Even the Canaanites who inhabited the land were powerless. Your people could deal with these nations and their kings as they pleased. Our ancestors captured fortified cities and fertile land. They took over houses full of good things, with cisterns already dug and vineyards and olive groves and fruit trees in abundance. So they ate until they were full and grew fat and enjoyed themselves in all your blessings. But despite all this, they were disobedient and rebelled against you. They turned their backs on your law. They killed your prophets who warned them to return to you, and they committed terrible blasphemies. So you handed them over to their enemies who made them suffer. But in the time of their trouble they cried to you, and you heard them from heaven. In your great mercy you sent them liberators who rescued them from their enemies. And I want to stop here at this point because we've been reading through this rather quickly. But notice the at least slight change in the view of God that these people have. There's less emphasis on God helping them defeat their enemies, although that is in here. There's more emphasis on God's patience and his watch care and his support for the people. And how, well, I mean, they didn't really blame God directly for them going into the hands of their enemies, just as you handed them over to their enemies. Well, that's the language that Paul used. You gave them over to whatever they wanted to do, so on and so forth. So that's, we're starting to see after this captivity, after the Babylonian exile, an improvement. It's not where it should be yet, but it is an improvement in the view they take of God. But as soon as they were at peace, your people again committed evil in your sight, and once more you let their enemies conquer them. Yet whenever your people turned and cried out to you again for help, you listened more from heaven, once more from heaven. In your wonderful mercy, you rescued them many times. You warned them to return to your law, but they became proud and obstinate and disobeyed your commands. They did not follow your regulations by which people will find life if only they obey. Well, yeah, that's the Old Testament view. Life is in the law. That was the view the people had in Jesus' day, and he told them, you search the scriptures every day. You think you'll find eternal life in them. Well, these scriptures testify about me, but you refuse to come to me to have life. So the life wasn't in the law like these people thought. It was in the Creator, and they needed to come to him. And to some extent, they're doing better at coming to the Creator. They're recognizing him as Creator. They're recognizing, to some extent, the goodness of his character. In your love, you were patient with them for many years. You sent your Spirit who warned them through the prophets, but still they wouldn't listen. So once again, you allowed the peoples of the land to conquer them. Notice the term allowed there. But in your great mercy, you did not destroy them completely or abandon them forever. What a gracious and merciful God you are. And now our God, the great and mighty and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of unfailing love, do not let all the hardships we have suffered seem insignificant to you. Great trouble has come upon us and upon our kings and leaders and priests and prophets and ancestors, all of your people, from the days when the kings of Assyria first triumphed over us until now. Every time you punished us, you are being just. We have sinned greatly, and you gave us only what we deserved. Our kings, leaders, priests, and ancestors did not obey your laws or listen to the warnings of your commands and laws. Even when they had their own kingdom, they did not serve you, though you showered your goodness on them. You gave them a large, fertile land, but they refused to turn from their wickedness. So now today we are slaves in the land of plenty that you gave our ancestors for their enjoyment. We are slaves here in this good land. The lush produce of this land piles up in the hands of the kings whom you have set over us because of our sins. They have power over us and our livestock. We serve them at their pleasure, and we are in great misery. The people responded, in view of all this, we are making a solemn promise and putting it in writing. On this sealed document are the names of our leaders and Levites and priests. The document was ratified and sealed with the following names: the governor, Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, and also Zedekiah. The following priests, and there's a long name, the following Levites with a list of names, the following leaders with a list of names. Then the rest of the people, the priests, Levites, gatekeepers, singers, temple servants, and all who had separated themselves from the pagan people of the land in order to obey the law of God, together with their wives, sons, daughters, and all who were old enough to understand, joined their leaders and bound themselves with an oath. They swore a curse on themselves if they failed to obey the law of God as issued by his servant Moses. They solemnly promised to carefully follow all the commands, regulations, and decrees of the Lord our God. And that verse makes me think of a cartoon phrase. Because, the cartoonists sometimes had interesting insights into human nature. So the little boy is pondering to himself, if I doed it, I get a whipping. I doed it. Yeah, they're calling a curse on themselves if they disobey, but they are not capable of obeying God's law. Certainly not the law as it really exists. Maybe the written law to some extent, but generally, even the written law, they're not going to be able to obey fully. But they called a curse on themselves, but they didn't obey. We promise not to let our daughters marry the pagan people of the land, and not to let our sons marry their daughters. The intermarriage issue is being brought up here. We also promise that if the people of the land should bring any merchandise or grain to be sold on the Sabbath or any other holy day, we will refuse to buy it. Every 7th year we will let our land rest, and we will cancel all debts owed to us. In addition, we promise to obey the command to pay the annual temple tax of 1/8 of an ounce of silver for the care of the temple of our God. This will provide for the bread of presence, for the regular grain offerings and burnt offerings, for the offerings on the Sabbath, the new moon celebrations, and the annual festivals, for the holy offerings, and for the sin offerings to make atonement for Israel. It will provide for everything necessary for the work of the temple of our God. We have cast sacred lots to determine when, at regular times each year, the families of the priests, Levites, and the common people should bring wood to God's temple to be burned on the altar of the Lord our God, as is written in the law. We promise to bring the first part of every harvest to the Lord's temple year after year, whether it be a crop from the soil or from our fruit trees. We agree to give God our oldest sons and the firstborn of all our herds and flocks, as prescribed in the law. We will present them to the priests who minister in the temple of our God. We will store the produce in the storerooms of the temple of our God. We will bring the best of our flour and other grain offerings, the best of our fruit, and the best of our new wine and olive oil. And we promise to bring to the Levites 1/10 of everything our land produces, for it is the Levites who collect the tithes in all our rural towns. A priest, a descendant of Aaron, will be with the Levites as they receive these tithes, and 1/10 of all that is collected as tithes will be delivered by the Levites to the temple of our God and placed in the storerooms. The people and the Levites must bring these offerings of grain, new wine, and olive oil to the storerooms and place them in the sacred containers near the ministering priests, the gatekeepers, and the singers. We promise together not to neglect the temple of our God. The leaders of the people were living in Jerusalem, the holy city. 1/10 of the people from the other towns of Judah and Benjamin were chosen by sacred lots to live there too, while the rest stayed where they were. And the people commended everyone who volunteered to resettle in Jerusalem. Here's a list of the names of the provincial officials who came to live in Jerusalem. Most of the people, priests, Levites, temple servants, and descendants of Solomon's servants continued to live in their own homes in the various towns of Judah, but some of the people from Judah and Benjamin resettled in Jerusalem. From the tribe of Judah, from the tribe of Benjamin, from the priests, from the Levites, from the gatekeepers. The other priests, Levites, and the rest of the Israelites lived wherever their family inheritance was located in any of the towns of Judah. The temple servants, however, whose leaders were Zihah and Gishpa, all lived on the hill of Othel. The chief officer of the Levites in Jerusalem was Uzzi, son of Bani, son of Hashabiah, son of Mattaniah, son of Micah, a descendant of Asaph, whose family served as singers at God's temple. Their daily responsibilities were carried out according to the terms of a royal command. Bethahiah, son of Meshezabel, a descendant of Zerah, son of Judah, was the royal advisor in all matters of public administration. As for the surrounding villages with their open fields, some of the people of Judah lived in Kiriath Arba with its settlements, Dibon with its settlements, and Jekabzeel with its villages. They also lived in Jeshua, Molada, Beth Pelet, Hazar Shual, Beersheba with its settlements, Ziklag, and Makona with its settlements. Recall that Ziklag was where David had lived when he was hiding from Saul. They also lived in Rimmon, Zorah, Jarmuth, Zanoah, and Adullam with their surrounding villages. And they also lived in Lachish with its nearby fields, and Azekah with its surrounding villages. So the people of Judah were living all the way from Beersheba in the south to the valley of Hinnom. Some of the people of Benjamin lived at Geba, Michmash, Aijah, and Bethel with its settlements. They also lived in Anathoth, Nob, Aniah, Hazer, Ramah, Gitaim, Hadid, Zeboim, Nebalat, Lod, Ono, and the valley of Craftsman. Some of the Levites who lived in Judah were sent to live with the tribe of Benjamin. So, the people all settled in these places. A history of the priests and Levites. Here is the list of the priests and Levites who returned with Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Yeshua the high priest. All those names. Okay. More names and a whole bunch more names. A record of the Levite families was kept during the years when Eliashib, Joiada, Johanan, and Jaddua served as high priest. Another record of the priests was kept during the reign of Darius the Persian. A record of the heads of the Levite families was kept in the book of history down to the days of Johanan, the grandson of Eliashib. These were the family leaders of the Levites. This included all those, okay. Dedication of Jerusalem's wall. For the dedication of the new wall of Jerusalem, the Levites throughout the land were asked to come to Jerusalem to assist in the ceremonies. They were to take part in the joyous occasion with their songs of thanksgiving and with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. The singers were also brought together from the region around Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites. They also came from Beth Gilgal and the rural areas near Geba and Asmaveth, for the singers had built their own settlements around Jerusalem. The priests and Levites first purified themselves, and they purified the people, the gates, and the wall. I led the leaders of Judah to the top of the wall and organized 2 large choirs to give thanks. One of the choirs proceeded southward along the top of the wall to the dung gate. Hoshea and half the leaders of Judah followed them, along with Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah. Then came some priests who played trumpets, including Zechariah, son of Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, son of Mattaniah, son of Micaiah, son of Zakur, a descendant of Asaph. And Zechariah's colleagues were a bunch of names. They used musical instruments prescribed by David, the man of God. Ezra the scribe led this procession. At the fountain gate they went straight up the steps on the ascent of the city wall toward the city of David. They passed the house of David and then proceeded to the water gate on the east. The second choir, giving thanks, went northward around the other way to meet them. I followed them, together with the other half of the people, along the top of the wall, past the Tower of the Ovens to the broad wall, then past the Ephraim gate to the old city gate, past the fish gate and the Tower of Hananel, and on to the Tower of the 100. Then we continued on to the sheep gate and stopped at the guard gate. The 2 choirs that were giving thanks then proceeded to the temple of God, where they took their places. So did I, together with a group of leaders who were with me. We went together with the trumpet-playing priests and the singers, They played and sang loudly under the direction of Jezreiah the choir leader. Many sacrifices were offered on that joyous day, for God had given the people cause for great joy. The women and children also participated in the celebration, and the joy of the people of Jerusalem could be heard far away. And then it talks about provisions for temple worship, the men appointed to be in charge of the storerooms and performing the service, and the customs that they carried on. So now in the days of Zerubbabel and of Nehemiah, all Israel brought a daily supply of food for the singers, the gatekeepers, and the Levites. The Levites in turn gave a portion of what they received to the priests, the descendants of Aaron. Now, I'm looking at our time, and our time is essentially up. And we have, what is it, one more chapter? I think so, because I think, yeah, okay. One more chapter. I would read this, but I want to comment on this chapter to some extent, and I don't want to take up a whole lot of time now because the time we've allotted for ourselves is up. So we didn't quite get all of Nehemiah. We have this one chapter left to do, but we're going to stop at this point. Now, I mentioned it briefly last week. I didn't mention it yet this week. We do have a sermon presentation prepared that we will, God willing, stream tomorrow at 11 o'clock Central Time, 11 a.m. Central Time. It's prepared. It's been proofread a time or two. I'll probably proofread it again. So you can plan on that. And other than that, until next week or then, when we invite you to join us for either one, we say goodbye and God bless.